Hi.
Hello, I guess it's working, right?
Yeah, it is. It's funny because I tried like maybe 10 minutes ago and it said that there was another meeting in progress already. And I thought maybe you already had started, but usually you can just join if that's the case. Whatever.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I know there's a few other things going on in the show tonight, but I guess
Yeah, but they're not using the same number because they have like 3 or 4 Zoom numbers. So,
I'm not trying to understand how Zoom works, but it looks like it's
oh, Shabbat Tov.
Shavua Tov. Let's give it a few minutes, see if anyone else is,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
If not, we can go ahead. There's a bar mitzvah tonight.
Oh, who?
Gillian Steinberg. You know Gillian?
Really? I did. You know what? I didn't read the bulletin before Shabbat.
So I think he's just doing like a speech or something. I don't exactly know what he's doing because unfortunately it's Zoom, right? But
Yeah.
I think it was scheduled like Purim time and they delayed it, and I think they must have just decided, you know.
Yeah,
Now,
that's difficult.
yeah, I'm sure it's very hard. Okay. Okay. Let's give it one more minute.
Hanan is here.
Yes, Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat Tov. I have a new orientation tonight, so we'll see.
Getting tired of this yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tricky. I think we all want to reopen. We don't know how.
Right.
It's gonna take a long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same way we close. No one really knows what they're doing, so that's the harder part. You know, it's like,
well, we're preparing for it, but it's like, it's going to take a long, long time. I know that, and I work for Hunter, and we already are talking about not opening for the fall semester in person. We're going to continue online instruction, which is insane.
Right. No, it is.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Well, according to the paper, the virus will probably be around for another 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, two seasons.
Yeah.
I guess the question, I don't think it's so much that, it's what do you do then?
Right, exactly. Well,
what precautions do you need? What's going to make it come back again?
Right. No, yeah, it's like, yeah.
But, and will it matter? Will people listen anyways? Like, I think
that
start doing more things no matter what.
Right.
There's that. There's also the fact that, the virus gets transmitted really fast when you have a transportation system like the one in New York City.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, but on a happier note, let's learn some Daf Yomi.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
hello everyone. So today's Daf is Daf Samach Dalid. Please let me know if I'm not loud enough. Again, I'm never really sure. And today's Daf is actually it's a good sequel, maybe a good summary of what we've been learning, because the first half of the Daf is going to discuss entirely issues of Tum'ah, of what counts as totally seemingly unrelated to Shabbos. But we've had many, many Gemaras like this already, so you can see a theme. We're going to talk a lot about these principles of Tum'ah, and then we'll get in the second half of the Daf back to our sort of topic of the Masechet. But again, I'm going to start, actually, I know Dov got up to the top line, but I'm going to start 5 lines from the bottom on Samach Gimel Amud Bet, because there's a Braita there, which is what our Gemara is going to be discussing. So let's read this Braita. I'll read it quickly because I think probably everyone has learned it already, but if not, stop me. So 6 lines from the bottom, Tanu Rabbanan, the Braita learns, a rig, if you have something that is woven, and assuming you're talking about some kind of cloth, right? So they used to, I don't know that much about cloth except from the Gemara, which is probably not the best way to learn it. But, they would take different animal hairs, essentially, and weave them together, what we call wool, etc. And if it's something is woven together, strings are woven together, then it's kol shehu tameh. Any amount, it doesn't have to be any large size, even a very small size will be tameh. Tachshit, and something that is used as a decoration, which could be metal, for example, or anything else, or earthenware that's worn as like an earring or something like that, kol shehu tameh. Also, any size, kol shehu here is referring to, even if it's very small, will be tameh. There's not a minimum size. Continues the Braita, a rig vid tachshit, if you something that's both woven and decorative, let's say you have like a bracelet that has, stones in it and cloth, or a piece of metal and cloth, then kol shehu tameh, Any size is tameh. Tosfos is very bothered by this because why would it say kol shu tameh if you said the arig, the woven thing, is tameh at any size, and the decorative thing is tameh at any size? Of course, if they're together, for sure it will be tameh. So Tosfos points out very important. That's why I'm quoting this Tosfos. Very importantly, that when the Gemara says kol shu tameh, it does not mean any size is tameh. It means even a very small size. But it's not telling you what that small size is. Meaning what the Gemara is telling you is that, or what the Bryce is telling you, is that you don't need a large size. Even a very minimal size object, like a ring or an earring or something that's very minimal, will be tameh. But it doesn't mean to say there's no shear. So kol shu sounds like anything, but it doesn't mean that. And he proves it from this point, that it means that it's a very small size. So there could be, let's say you have a ring that has a 3 millimeter or 1 centimeter piece of metal and a piece of string going around it. That might be smaller than quote unquote kol shehu, but it's still, if it's together, makes an object, it'll be tameh. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rava. Where am I? Did I skip somewhere? Yeah. Mosif sak al habeged. Now, sak is more stringent or has more rules than beged. So Rashi explains, not here, but really on the next daf, that sak generally, so beged generally refers to wool, or I don't exactly know what other materials people use for thread, but fine thread, what we make clothes out of. Sak, which literally means a sack, meaning it's coarser, generally refers to hair from a goat that you would use. We'll see later also maybe camel hair or horse hair, but hair that you use from a coarser animal that makes not as good thread, and you might use it for a sack, or you might use it for something that you don't need as much as fine a cloth with. So sak is mosif al habeged shetameh mishum arig. It's tameh even when it's woven. Now the Gemara is going to say that makes no sense, but we'll get there. Amar Rava. Now says Rava about this brayta, arig kol shehu tameh. How do we know that something that's woven, even a minimum size, is tameh? Because the pasuk says o beged. Instead of just saying the word beged, it says o. The word o is extra. This was in yesterday's daf, and that's marbe, even a very small size.
Are we finished with the Breita? Now we're back to the
Rava is after the Breita. Amar Rava is the end of the Breita.
Is the end of the Breita.
Well, Rava is commenting on the Breita, yeah. So Rava explains, and we said this yesterday actually, but it's a good review, that the way we know arig kol shehu, that even a very small thing that's woven is tameh, is from the word o, the extra word o, beged, and tachshit kol shehu, this is what we discussed yesterday's daf, the way you know that even a very small ring, for example, or a necklace or something, is tameh, is mitzitz, from the fact that the tzitz that the Kohen Gadol wore, which was very small, we said yesterday, it was a very thin strip of metal, of gold, it was tameh, and that's how we know a tachshit is tameh. And the way we know arig v'tachshit kol shehu tameh is because there's an extra pasuk that says kol kli ma'aseh. Anything that you make into a kli, even if it's very, very small, will be tameh. Now, Amar le'humer Rabbanan Rava. Now, one of the Rabbanan said to Rava, how can you learn out from that pasuk of kol kli ma'aseh, ahu b'midyan ktiv? That pasuk is written when they came back from the war in Midyan, right, with all the booty, for example. So Rashi says, well, and Midyan is talking about tumat meit. So how can you know that this is tameh for everything else, right? Tumat sheretz, tumat erev, these things, if you only know it from Midyan. So Amar Le, his answer to him was, Gamar kli mi hatam. And there's an extra word kli by tumat sheretz, which is I would say, quote unquote, a lesser tuma, not as extreme tuma, as tumat meit. And so we compare it to tumat meit, and that's how we learn. That's how we know that. Okay, Tosfos has a different shot, but I think it's not. Let's just keep going because it's not as integral. If you want afterwards, I can tell you. Continues the Gemara though, and this is why I read this whole thing, is because now we're quoting the Breita again. The Breita said, Mosif sak al habeged shtameh mishum arig. That sak is added, has additional levels of tumah compared to beged, because sak is tameh when it's woven together. It says it doesn't make any sense. We just told you that things that are woven together are tameh no matter what they're made out of. What do you mean sak is more? Atu beged lav ariku? Again, a beged is not tameh if it's arig usually means woven together, right? But stitched, woven together, it doesn't make any sense. This is where hachikama. This is what the Breita is saying. Mosif sak al habeged, that even afal pi she'eino arig tameh. That sak is more than beged, that even if you don't weave together the threads, it will be tameh. Meaning, if you have wool cloth, let's say, wool thread, and you tie it together, but you don't weave it together to make it into an object, then it's not tameh. It's just the cloth. It's just the thread, sorry. But sock, if you have goat hair, let's say, even if you don't weave it together, it can become tameh. How? Says the Gemara. Lamai chazi, what are you going to do with these threads? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, shekain ani kolea shalosh nimin b'tola b'tzavar bito. That if you couldn't afford, back in the day, if you were poor and you couldn't afford fancy jewelry, what you would do is you would take 3 hairs, again, these are long, say, goat hairs. Rashi says they would dye them so that it wasn't gray. You would make them red or whatever. And you would kolea. Kolea means to twist, right? Is that how we use it in Hebrew?
Collé? Collé means to actually glue together.
Oh, so I thought, okay, well, I'll go with that because I trust you. Kolea means to stick together, we'll say, okay,
Yeah.
glue together or use whatever. And so you didn't weave them together, so they're not formally tied together, but they're stuck together, and they can make a tolebet savar bito. You'll hang it around your daughter's neck for a necklace. And so even though, and partly you can do this because the threads are thicker, you understand? So if you take a very thin thread and do this, it'll break or it won't last. But because the sock, which is made from goat's hair, is very thick, people would use it. And so what the Braita is telling you is that things that are thicker threads will become tameh as long as you glue them together or somehow paste them together, even if you don't sew them together.
In other words, it has to be able to have some use in order to become tameh.
That's the question. My cousin has to have some use.
I think that likloa means to braid. That was the way I use it. Likloa, for me, with the ayin, means to braid.
Okay. I don't have an English in front of me, but I know it means to make them be together. I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. So, but it's not as intense.
Yes.
It's not as
Yes.
sewn together
Yes.
as ariga, which is
Yes.
more. Now, let's get to the next Braita, which is going to now, in a very fascinating way, go through this whole issue. This is a tricky Braita, but I'll try to do my best. It says, the Braita is quoting the Pasuk. The Pasuk, I have Psukim here, and this is a Pasuk from Vayikra, so Vayikra Yud Aleph. So, I'll read it. It says, I'm reading now the Pasuk, so hold off for a second. It says, Kol asher yipol alav mehem b'motam yitzma, anything that falls on them when they're dead. This is talking about sheretz. We'll make something tameh. This is Parashat Shmini. Nikol klietz, o beged, o ar, o sak. The Torah says 4 categories. Klietz, which means, a pot, let's say of wood, right? So a salad bowl. O beged, which again usually means wool. So fine cloth made into a shirt. O ar, or leather, right? Hide. O sak, which I said means, usually goat's hair, but can also mean we're going to see other kinds of hair. And then the pasuk says, "Kol kli asher yaseh melacha behem." Any kli that you do melacha, which is what we quoted before today, making them tameh. Says the Braita, sak. The Torah says the word sak. Ein li ela sak. So I only know a sak. Rashi says a finished thing, and Rashi says the example of a sak is asoy lobosh ro'im, something like a rain jacket that a shepherd would wear. So a very coarse clothing that's worn by someone, working out in the fields who doesn't have fine clothing. How do I know, says the Braita, how do I know to include other devices that are made from sock? Rashi understands, I don't understand all the words in Rashi, but Rashi says they're referred to like the bridle around a horse or a saddle, for example, that are made, again, you don't need to make these out of fine linen or fine wool, but you make them out of sack. How do you know that those are also tameh? Tamulomar osa. That tells you the word o is marbe those things. Yachol shani marbet chavalim et mishichot. I might think that you also can include ropes and things that are used for measuring, meaning they're long units of sack. Again, sack is goat's hair or other hair that's used for measurement, but is not made into a object that's worn or that's put on something. Tamulomar sak. Therefore, we say that the word sak is to tell you, ma sak tavi v'ari. A sak is something that's woven and put together. Afkol, it has to be tavi v'ari. Okay, we're gonna go through this in more detail. Just be patient for a second. Continues the Braita. Harehu omer b'meit. Now, if you look at tumat meit, right? Now, I just told you this was talking about tumat sheretz, right? A bug. Harehu omer b'meit, but by tumat meit, the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk that is coming up. It says v'chol kli or, well, not coming up so soon, but eventually. It's in I think the end of Bamidbar, near maybe Bechukotai, but towards the end, it says V'chol Kli Or, V'chol Masei Izim, Titchatao. Right, it says anything. This is, I'm sorry, when they came back from Midian, this is where the pasuk is. So in wherever that is, when they come back from Midian and they had the fight, Chukas, right? I think it's when they came back. So it says there, Kol Kliar V'chol Masei Izim, any vessel that's made out of leather or made out of sheep. Now, Izim, remembers what I told you is what sock is. There it says Titchato, they should clean it off, right? And that says the Braita, the Rabota Kilkli Chavek. That's to include something that's made for like the saddle or the bridle of the horse. That's made out of izim. So we're being marba this for tumat meit, just like we did for tumat sheretz. Says the Braita, I might think that you also include these ropes. Edinu, and I would say it's a kal v'chomer, because timei b'sheretz. The Torah has said that sak is tamei when with tumat sheretz, and it's also timei b'meit, and it's tamei by tumat meit. Ma kishetima b'sheretz, just like when we said by tumat sheretz, lo timei ela taviva ari, we're only mitamei things that are woven and stitched together, meaning not the ropes. Af kishetimei b'meit, lo timei ela taviva ari, right? So therefore, I would say the same thing should be true by tumat meit, that you're not mitamei a rope because it's not tied, it's not sewn together. Says the Gemara, well, that doesn't really prove it, because you might say hein. This is still the bright. Hein in hikal b'tumei sheretz. Maybe that's only true that the Torah was making by tumat sheretz shehi kala. Tumat sheretz is a kal tumah, right? If you touch a sheretz, you only tamei till the night, one evening. Tumat meit, you're tamei for 7 days. So the fact that a rope is not tamei sheretz doesn't mean that it won't be metamei tumat meit. Maybe the tumat meit shehi chamura. Maybe then you have to have tumah. Talmud Omer beged v'or. The Torah says the word beged and or, and we learn beged v'or l'gzera shava. We learn a gzera shava. Remember, gzera shava is a principle where you have two verses with the same wording, and you learn from one pasuk to the other. So nemar beged v'or b'sheretz. It says the words that a beged and an or, meaning clothing and leather, is tummy by sheretz. Nemar beged v'or b'meit. It says it by tumat meit. Ma beged v'or hamor b'sheretz lo timei ela taviva ari. Just like we just derived that beged, that when it says beged v'or by tumat sheretz, it's only tamei if it's woven into an object, right? A clothing object or a something you sit on. So af beged v'or hamor b'meit lo timei ela taviva ari. Period. Comma. We're still not done with the Braita. Finishes the Braita. Uma beged v'or hamor b'meit tamei kol ma'aseh izim. Just like by the beged and or that it said by tumat meit, it included everything made from goat hair, not just clothing that's made from goat hair, meaning even the saddle and things like that. Af beged v'or hamor b'sheretz tamei kol ma'aseh izim. It will include all maseh izim, including the saddle. Now the Gemara is going to ask in a little bit. We just learned it out from the word oh, but we'll get there. And ein li ela davar haba min ha'izim. I only know things that come from goat hair. How do I? Because that's what we normally assume is what sak is. Minayin rabot davar haba mizanav hasus, mizanav hapara. How do you know to also include horse hair and cow hair? I'm not really sure what kind of hair you get from a cow, but zanav hapara, tamulomar o sak. So then we use the word o sak to tell you the o is extra to tell you that all kinds of sak, not just goat hair, but even horse hair and even cow hair. Says Gemara, but how could you learn from the word osak? You remember we said earlier in today's daf that the way we know not only clothing made out of sak, but even a saddle made out of sak is tamei, is from the word o. So how can you use that to also tell you a horse? It's like, Gemara, we don't need the pasuk anymore for that. Because hani mili becoming dialectic gzera shava. That was before we had the gzera shava to learn out from tumat meit. Hashta da'at gzera shava. Now that we have a gzera shava, we can learn out from tumat meit that all things made out of goat hair are tamei, or suitable for tamei. And now we have a yaterle, we have an extra word of o to tell me that even horse hair and even cow hair will be tamei, like sak. Says the Gemara, but ein li ela b'sheretz. I only know that horse hair is tamei by sheretz. B'tumat meit minayin. How do I know b'tumat meit? That's where, well, I have a kal v'chomer, but didn't. Maybe there's a kal v'chomer. Because timei b'meit, timei b'sheretz. Sak is tamei by tumat mate and by sheretz. Ma kishetimei b'sheretz asar davar haba mizanav hasus mizanav hapara kemasei izin. Just like by tumat sheretz, they made also zanav hasus, also the hair from the horse, and the para is like the goats, as we just learned from the word o. Af kishetimei b'mate. So you should then learn from tumat mate that it's the same thing. Asar davar haba mizanav hasus mizanav hapara kemasei izin. Well, that's interesting. It seems like a good din, or din is not a kavul chomer. It's essentially a hekesh, right? Something happens there, it should happen here. But so the Gemara, but I can tell you there's a difference between the two cases. Because hein in hirbeh b'tumat erev she merubeh. Maybe the Torah was marbeh more types of things to come tameh by tumat erev. Because think about it. When you think of all the ways a person can come tameh for one day. Like there are many, many ways. A person can tameh by touching let's say a zav, for example. A person can come tameh by touching someone who touched a dead body, not the dead body itself, but the person who touched it. By tumat sheretz, tumat shichvat zera. Right? There's many ways to become tameh erev. But maybe, so we call that merubeh, but maybe you're not near beh tumat shiva, she mu'etet. There's only one way to become tameh for 7 days, and that's by touching a dead body or being in a tent with a dead body. So maybe it's not as expansive. Tamalomar, beged ve'or l'gzera shava, and that's why by both tumat mate and by tumat sheretz, it uses the word beged ve'or, and that is gzera shava, to tell you that nemar beged ve'or b'sheretz, it says the words beged ve'or by tumat sheretz, nemar beged ve'or b'mate, and it says by tumat mate, ma beged ve'or hamor b'sheretz, asad davar abba mizanav asus mizanav havar kamasei izin. Just like by tumat sheretz, we added not only does it mean things that are made from goats, but things that are made from horses and cows. And that's the end of the Braita, we think. Okay? Beautiful. Long, extensive, complicated Braita. Says the Gemara, but let me just point out one thing. Umufne. Remember that when we, Gzera Shava, again, as you recall, is where you have shavet, right? You have words that are similar in two different places. And so we say, just like the word over there means something, it means the same thing somewhere else. But sometimes those words are integral and sometimes those words are extra. And as we've learned many times, and we'll learn many times, Gzera Shava has more power if the words that are used for Gzera Shava are extra words. Because then you could say that the Torah is saying these extra words in order to teach you about something elsewhere. Sometimes Gzera Shava words are not extra, and we still learn from them about meaning, but there you can't learn as much because those words might not have been put there just for that purpose. And that's what we call mufna. Mufna literally means it's extra, it's open, meaning it's unnecessary. Says the Gemara, this has to be Gzera Shava that's mufna. It has to be that these words beged or are not necessary in context. Why does it have to be that way? Di lav mufna, because if it wasn't that these words were extra, ikila mifra. I could have asked a question and uprooted your Gzera Shava. Because I could have said that there's a big difference between tumat sheretz and tumat mate. And what is that? Ma'ala sheretz shkemet tameh b'kadasha. You recall, a sheretz, sheratzim are very small. And a sheretz can be mitameh even if it's the size of a adasha, is a lentil or a bean?
Lentil.
Lentil.
Thank you. Which is tiny, right? I've eaten lentils. They're very small. And tumat mate, you have to probably have a kazayit from a mate, which is, 100 times, not 10 times as big probably, right? Now there's some mate which is a little bit less, but let's just say you need to have a kazayit. So therefore I might say that there's tumat sheretz is much more expansive. Maybe a sheretz includes a horse. Tumat sheretz includes a horse because it's much more a strict tumah. The word la'ai, in fact, that's true. La'ai always means be'emet, Rashi says. It's true. Mefnuye mufna. The words are extra. Because why are the words extra? So we're about to read, this is from this week's parsha. I'm going to read the psukim to you now because although everyone probably read them this morning, you didn't hear Bernie read them this morning. So the pasuk says, where am I? The pasuk says, I'm reading, this is Perek Chaf Bet pasuk Dal, which is today's parsha. It says, where am I? Hanogea b'chol tamei nefesh, a person who touches a dead body. We're talking about kohanim, right? Not eating. So a person who touches a dead body, tamei nefesh. A person who's tamei nefesh. Ish asher teitzei mimenu shechvat zera, or a kohen who has semen. Oh, the next pasuk is, oh, isha sheyiga b'chol sheretz, sheyitma. Person who touches a sheretz. So the Torah puts next to each other tumat meit, shichvat zera, and then sheretz. And that's what we're about to darshan. Says the Gemara, that's why it's extra. Why? Because look, nichti. Now I'm back in the Gemara. Sheretz itgish to shichvat zera. Sheretz is placed right next to shichvat zera, and that pasuk I just read to you. Dichtiv, isha sheyitzeh mimeno shichvat zera, and the next pasuk is samach le isha sheyiga b'chol sheretz. So hekesh remembers when things are in proximity. So right next to each other, we say shichvat zera, and then tumat sheretz. And by shichvat zera, it says elsewhere, L'chol beged v'chol or asher yelav shichvat zera. It says any beged, any or that has shichvat zera is tameh. So if by shichvat zera I know that beged or is tameh, why? And I know that sheretz is next to shichvat zera. Beged v'ar dekativ rachmana b'sheretz lamali. Why does the Torah have to use the words again? All beged and or is tameh by sheretz. If I already know that, because I would compare it to shichvat zera. Shmamina lafnuye. So it's extra. And it's extra to tell you that just like beged va'or by sheretz includes horsehair, so too by tumat meit, it would include that. Okay, but still it's only mufta on one side. Right? Only the sheretz is extra. What about the words by tumat meit? Akati mufta mitzad echadu, it's only extra so far on one side of the limud. So is that good enough? It says, according to the man Amar that one side of Gzera Shava that's extra is enough to learn and not ask questions about. That's great, because then you can't ask the question of Mala Sheretz, which is Mitameh, like an Adasha. But according to the man Amar that you can be Lameidin, but you can be Meshivin, meaning you can teach it, but you can also refute it by asking questions. This is only a one-sided extra Gzera Shava. It says, well, no, it's actually two-sided. The Meit Nami Afnei Mufna, the words by Tumat Meit are also extra because the same thing. I just read to you the pasuk. Nichti Meit Itkish Shichvat Zera. Tumat Meit is also compared to Shichvat Zera. Dichtiv, it's the same pasuk I just read to you. Is Hanogea B'chol Tamei Nefesh O Isha Shetitze Mimenu Shichvat Zera. So it's a hekesh. They're put right next to each other, and it says by Shichvat Zera Kol Beged B'chol Or. So we already know that. Therefore, the words Beged V'Or Dekater Rachmanim B'Meit Lameli Shma Mina Lafnui, they're totally extra. And so now we have extra words beged and or by tumat meit. We have extra words beged or by tumat sheretz, and we can make a gzera shava that anything that applies to one applies to the other. And since we used an extra pasuk of the word o to include that when it says o sak, it doesn't just mean what we normally think of as sak, which is clothing made out of goat's hair. It includes even other kinds of animal hair. So too by tumat meit, objects that are made out of horsehair, for example, will be tamei meit. So now we learned a lot about Tumah, and we're almost about to get back to Shabbat, but we want to do one more thing while we're quoting all these psukim about the returning from Midian. It says that when the fighters came back from Midian, v'nikrav et karban Hashem, they brought a sacrifice to God. Ish asher matzah kli zahav, everyone who found any kind of beautiful golden thing, including etzada, Vitsamid, which are like earrings and necklaces, tabat and rings, agil, v'chumaz. Now, what's agil and chumaz? Those are weird words. And agil sounds like it's round. But what does that mean? So Amar Belazar, those are referring to much more intimate and sexual devices. Agil was round, but it was a defush shel dadim. It was some kind of round thing that would be placed over a woman's breast that would be, enticing to someone who was there. So that's on one level. And kumaz is a defush shel beit harechem. Kumaz is some kind of jewelry that she would wear on her genitals, on her beit harechem. So these were, going from earrings inward, so to speak. Amar Rav Yosef, says Rav Yosef, Yihachi, Haim de Metargamina Machoch. Now I understand. Yihachi, Haim de Metargamina Machoch. The word kumaz in the Targum is translated as machoch. What does machoch mean? Davar hamevila de gichuch. Machoch means like a smile or a laugh. These are something that people do when they're laughing and they're acting frivolous, including sexually. Amrle Rava, and Rava said, Migufit dikra shmamina. I would have learned this even without the Targum. From the pasuk, what does the word kumaz mean? It's a nutrikan. It's a I don't know how you say nutrikan in English, but
acronym.
Acronym, okay, that sounds good. Kan makom zima. this is the place of znut. This is a place where you sleep with. So that's a kumaz, is a word referring to some kind of jewelry that was worn in a very private part. So that was the jewelry that they all brought back as a karban to Hashem. So, there's a whole speech here, but not for tonight. But then the next pasuk is that once Moshe saw all this gold that the people were bringing, like Sof Moshe Moshe got angry at them. Why did Moshe get angry? Why was Moshe happy that they were bringing this gift? Says the Gemara, because Moshe was very suspicious. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, Amar Moshe Yisrael. Whoa, maybe you went back to your original sin. Remember, the whole reason they went to fight Midian is because they had sinned terribly with the whole story, with the girls, the women going out, and the men, with what's his name, Pinchas, right? Cousin. Thank you. Right. Thank you. So this was the whole story of they slept with these women, right? And then they went out and fought war against them. So Moshe was worried that they were coming back from war, and the first thing he wanted to do was to bring a sacrifice. And he got very suspicious that perhaps that meant that they were feeling very guilty about things that they had done during this war. And of course, their sacrifice was all the jewelry, and including the very intimate jewelry. So maybe they had gone back to their original sin. Amar lo, so they said to Moshe, the next words are, Lo nifkod mimenu ish. You haven't lost a single person, meaning nobody was affected. So Amar Lahanim came kapara lama. So why are you saying sorry? What's your thing? Amru lo, they said, because one second, it's one thing not to go against an avera. We didn't have impure thoughts, right? We were enticed during this war. We saw all this jewelry and all this beautiful stuff, and we had thoughts of doing things wrong, and therefore, although none of us acted on it, we want to bring a sacrifice. Miyad, so immediately Moshe accepted it, karban Hashem, and he brought it to Hashem. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel taught, why do they have to bring this kapara? Because although they didn't sleep with anybody, they were zan. And Rashi understands zan means that they enjoyed. Their eyes were enjoyed looking at or appreciating the erva of the women of Moab, and therefore they brought a karban. Amar Rav Sheshet, says Rav Sheshet finally on the same point, why does the Torah give you this list, right, of the earrings and the necklaces and the rings and the very private adornments that women wore on their genitals? It's to tell you, anyone who looks at a woman for the sake of pleasure to sleep with her inappropriately is just the same as Ilo Mistakel, the Makom HaTorpa. It's as if he looked at her most private parts, meaning it doesn't matter if the jewelry is on the outside or the inside. If the intent of looking at it is for something bad or for desire, then it's just as bad.
Well, etzba means the ring?
Well, etzba means their finger, but the point is that you could look at something that's very visual, right? And it could be something you see a woman's fingers all the time. If you're looking at it for the purpose of znut, then it's the same as looking at her most private parts. Again, it's not necessarily where it is, it's the intent. Tosas is a little bit bothered, I'll do this for 1 second, that Tosas points out that of course the Torah allows for a whole provision of Yifat Torah, right? That you can go to war, it says you see a woman who you like, you can bring her home and marry her. So how could it be that these soldiers were so worried about looking and desiring? Torah has a whole provision for that. Right? So Tosas makes the point that although the Torah clearly does permit a Yeshet Yifat Torah, the Torah doesn't do it without limitation. And he references the Gemara in Kedushin, which we'll get to in a couple of years, about how the Chazal at least put very strict parameters around Yifat Torah. There has to be very specific circumstances in which you engage in that behavior, but it's not a free-for-all. That you can rape and pillage anyone you want during war and even have those thoughts. And that's what they were trying to get kapara for.
Right here, the Tosafot?
Tosafot is in Amud Aleph, the bottom of it.
Oh, the bottom of the previous stuff. Thank you.
Continues the Mishnah. Back to Shabbos. Remember, we've been talking about what a woman can't go out with or what can go out with. Continues the Mishnah. We've quoted this Mishnah before. Yotza isha b'chutei sar. A woman can go out with extra hair that's not her, that's tied to her head, bein mishalah, someone called it a weave last week, right? A weave, whether it's her own hair, bein mishel chaverta, or it's another woman's hair, bein mishel behema, or if it's an animal hair. And Rashi here, I don't know if Rashi was familiar with hair or not, but Rashi quote says from a horse. I'm not sure who's putting horse hair on their head, but that's what Rashi says. So no matter where it's from, maybe that was something common. I guess Rashi probably did know, to be honest. But nonetheless, whatever type of fake, it's not fake hair, right, but detached hair that a woman puts on is fine. Continues the Mishnah. And we quoted this earlier. These are different kind of bands you would put on for healing. Those are okay, bisman shein tfurin, as long as they are tied, as long as they're stitched down. Sewn, thank you. Sewn into your hair so that you won't walk around with them. Again, remember the prohibition of all these things. You're allowed to wear anything that's for tachshit. The only reason the Mishnah prohibited anything is because we're afraid you're going to take it off and carry it in Rishut Rabim. Either because you're embarrassed by it, as we said by some things, or because you want to show it to your friend, right? And we're worried you're going to walk with it. But if it's attached, you're not worried.
I thought there were two reasons. One, it was a burden and not necessary, and the other was that it might come off.
Right. So correct. Well, there are certain things that are considered. So remember, a burden was mainly by animals we talked about. But yes, but there are certain things that are not considered clothing, right, for example. Right. But these are all things that are done as long as it's done for decoration. The only prohibition is that you're going to carry it. Okay. Bikavul ubepeya nachrit. Now you can go out with a hat and a peya nachrit. Rashi says is
A wig.
Well, it is a wig, right? But Rashi makes it it's a wig that's not attached very well, so it can fall off quite easily. There, you can go lechatzer. You can go into the courtyard, meaning you can't go into Rishut Rabim. So, because it's not attached very well, and it can either fall off or you'll take it off to show it. But you are allowed to go out with it into a chatzer, and we'll see why in the Gemara. Now, continues the Mishnah, very, very fascinating. B'moch shebazna, right? Let's say you have a busted eardrum and you have some pus coming out of your ear. So you can put a moch. A moch is like a Band-Aid, right? Like a cotton swab, something that's absorbent in your ear. You can go out with it on Shabbat. Ubemoch shebasandala, or something like that in your sandal. Let's say you have a blister or you have a cut in your foot. It's dangerous. You can put a moch around it. Ubemoch shebasandala, or something she wears is like a sanitary napkin, which makes sense. So all those things you can go out with on Shabbat because they're important. They have a function. We're not afraid you're going to take it out. And she can go out with pilpel. Let's say a woman, and again, this would be true about a man, who has bad breath and they have a pepper that they're chewing on. Oh, big Gilgal Melach, or Rashi says they have a toothache and they have like a salt tab or something that I guess, dulls the pain. All of these things they can go out with, even though they're not clothing, clearly. Anything you put in your mouth to help with your breath or with avoiding, disease. You can't put that in on Shabbat. So it has to be something that's there long term from before Shabbat. You can go out with it on Shabbat. But if it falls out, you can't put it back in on Shabbat. We're going to discuss this. And it continues the Mishnah. Shein tochevet. You can, if you have, let's say you have a fake tooth, right? Shein shel zahav, a tooth made out of gold. Rebbe matir, v'chachamim osrim. There's a debate whether you can go out with Shabbat with your false teeth, which obviously is very relevant for some people, even today, okay? And we'll get there in the Gemara. I don't think we're going to discuss dentures today, but shein tochevet. Okay, it says Gemara tzricha. Now you need to tell me all three kinds of hair: a woman's own hair, another woman's hair, or an animal hair, and that you can go out with them on Shabbat. Why? If you only told me a woman's hair, her own hair, I would say because it feels natural to her. It's not something she'll get disgusted by. She might feel uncomfortable wearing someone else's hair. And so she might feel uncomfortable or embarrassed in public and take it off and walk with it. So aim low. We don't worry about that. But if you only told me her friend's hair, I would say, oh, okay, at least about Mina here. At least it's her own, it's a human hair. And she might, Rashi makes it sound like she might be embarrassed because it'll be obvious that this is fake, right? Everyone will know that. And so she might see someone who she's embarrassed about and take it off and hold it behind her and walk with it. So we therefore need to say all three. And presumably the chiddush is that she won't take it. this is a common enough thing, and so she'll keep it on her head, and we're not worried she's going to carry it. Tana, now the Braita adds though, but a person who's got young hair cannot go out with older looking hair. Rashi understands this to be color. Right? Someone who's got dark, Rashi shachar, I don't know if they have light hair in France, but someone who has, I guess they probably did, right? Frenchies light something? I don't know.
Do what?
Do they have light hair? Rashi says shachar as opposed to lavan, I think. Right? So a woman who's young has dark hair, and a woman who's older has lighter hair. So you can't go out. And again, the assumption is that the person's going to be embarrassed, and that might just be the only wig that was available. But then she'll see her friend and be very embarrassed to show off looking older or younger than she should be, and therefore take it off. So that you're not allowed to go out with that. Says, why in the world would anyone ever put on hair that makes them look older? I understand that a person who's older will put on hair that makes them look younger because everyone wants to look younger. It looks good. I don't think this is true anymore, right? But I guess it was the cultural norms then. Says, well, you're right. No one really would ever do that, but we just wanted to say it because the symmetry sounded nice. I did Tana skena b'shel yalda. We said that a person who's got hair that's older, lighter, or whiter hair, you can't wear hair of a darker hair. So too, we said the other way. Tani nama, tana nami yalda b'shel skena. Okay. Continued the Mishnah. You can go out with the kavul of the pan nachrit, but only to the chatzer, only into the courtyard. Amar Rav. Now says Rav, I want to tell you a very basic rule about our whole parak and the last parak and the next one. This one and the last one. Anything in the Chachamim said that you can't go out into Reshut Rabim on Shabbat because we're afraid you're going to carry it. Also, let's say the chatzer. You also can't walk out with it into your own courtyard because we're worried that you're going to be in your courtyard. You're going to be wearing this, unattached big hair, and you'll run out into the Reshut Rabim. Except for two exceptions. What our Mishnah said, chutz mi kavul pe'an nachrit. Except for this category of this hat and this pe'an nachrit, those are the only things that you can go out with into a chatzer, even though you're not allowed to go into a Reshut Rabim. But everything else that we mentioned, you cannot go out. If you can't go into a Reshut Rabim, we also made a gzera, you can't go into the chatzer. Rabbi Anani bar Sasson, it was a very unusual name, but Rabbi Anani bar Sasson said in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, Hakol kikavul, that no, it's not true. Everything that we said in our Mishnah and in our whole parak that you can't go out with on Shabbat, you can go into the chatzer with, because there's no issue of carrying in your own chatzer, it's your private chatzer, and so you're allowed to go into your chatzer. Kavul is only an example, it's not the exception. It's not. Now, we quote our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? Kavul ubepeyan nachrit l'chatzer. That with the kavul and peyan nachrit, you can go out into the chatzer. So Bishlam Rav Nicha, that's exactly what Rav said. That these are an exception. Ela Rabbi Anani bar Sasson kasha, because our Mishnah makes it sound like this is the only exception, that there's no other one. Says you're right. Rabbi Anani can disagree with our Mishnah. Rabbi Anani bar Sasson mishmei deman kamarlei. Who did he say it in the name of? Mishmei Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. He quoted Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, Tana hu palei. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi is a Tana. As we remember, earlier we had several stories with him discussing, arguing with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, right? He's a Tana. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi was in the last generation of Tanaim, and he can argue with our Mishnah. So that's fine. There's no question from our Mishnah. Now, Rav Maishnahan, according to Rav, or our Mishnah essentially, that says that the only exception is Kavul and Pe'an Nachrit. Why is that different than everything else? Why do they say that when everything else you can't go out with on Shabbat, you also can't go into your chatzer except for these two things? Why? Amar Ula says Ula, because we have to allow a woman to feel like she looks good for her husband. So she shouldn't be thought of ganeh. She shouldn't look like a ganai, like low in front of her husband. So she can't go out with it because we're afraid she's going to carry it on Shabbat. But in her own home on Shabbat, we made an exception to allow her to wear a hat or a sheitel, I'll use our word, pe'an nachrit, in order to look good for her. I don't know if look good for her husband's the right words, but she shouldn't feel repulsed. Her husband shouldn't be repulsed by her. Keditanya, as we learned, this is a very important thing. The pasuk says but by a nida, hadaveh benidata, that a woman is daveh in her nida. And what is that word? What does the word daveh mean? So the Zakenim Rishonim Amru, the earlier Zakenim, or not what their names are, they explain that daveh means that she should be set into her nidot. She should be kavua. Rashi is to understand. She should be, emphasize it. Meaning, shelo tikcho, lo tifko. She shouldn't put on eyeshadow or makeup on her face. Lo titkashet b'bidei tziv'onim. She shouldn't put on colorful clothing. Meaning, when a woman's a nidah, she should sort of, I would say, sink into it, but emphasize it so that she is not desirable to her husband because he's not supposed to be with her when she's a nidah. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came, v'limed, imkin ata meganeh al ba'ala. If so, her husband will find her unattractive, right? Because she's trying to be unattractive. V'nimtza ba'ala megarsha. It'll ruin their relationship. Will end up getting divorced. So it's a terrible idea, said Rabbi Akiva. What does the Torah mean when it says dava benidata? It means benidata tehei ad Shabbat b'mayim. It's a whole set tavei b'mayim. It's a whole different limud saying that a woman who is a nida remains a nida until she goes to the mikvah. So daveh here means she's sort of stuck in her nida. It doesn't end when her 7 days end. She has to go to a mikvah. But says Rabbi Akiva, you have to remember the principle is really important, is that we make halachic not exceptions, but boundaries to allow for normal human relationship, which most people want their partner to be attractive. And so because of that, even on Shabbat, you're not supposed to walk out with these things, but they made an exception for things that we thought would be important for attraction between a woman and her husband.
So I guess the assumption is that if she wouldn't wear it inside unless she could go to the chatzer with it or something?
No, the assumption is that a person's going to be in their chatzer on Shabbat.
Okay.
Right. So if you said to her she couldn't go, she's going to go to her chatzer regardless. She's not going to stay in her room. So if you said a woman couldn't wear this on Shabbat, she would go into the chatzer without it, and then look not be attractive in her relationship.
So but the assumption is she's not going into Rishut Rabim.
Right. Correct. Well, we're prohibited, but she doesn't have to go into Rishut Rabim. But let me just be very clear. Even according to this explanation, once you permit it, you could permit it for anybody, right? Let's say she doesn't have a husband, right? It would still be mutar. It's just saying that they didn't extend it to this category because of that reason. But she could not go into Rishut Rabim still. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, says Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol makom shasru chachamim b'nei marit ayin, anything that the rabbis prohibited because we're afraid that someone, let's say you're not allowed to go out and eat a cheeseburger and a McDonald's, wrapper in public because people think you're eating not kosher. So anything that falls into that category, you also can't even do it even in your bedroom because once they said not to do it, you can't do it at all. It's none. Now look at our Mishnah earlier in the parak. It said, in last parak, below bezug, you can't take a horse out with a bell, a cow, I guess, with a bell around its neck. Even if the bell is stopped up, so it's not making noise. And we explained earlier, that's because it looks like you're taking it to market. People are going to think you're trying to sell your cow on Shabbat. So that's marit ayin, right? You're not actually trying to sell your cow, but people will think that. And Tanya Idach, there's another braita that says that in fact, pokek la tzug b'tzavara m'taylim b'chatzer, that you're allowed to do it. You're allowed to stop up that you're allowed to do it in your chatzer. You're allowed to be pokek the zug and walk with it in your chatzer. So here you have an example of something that you're not allowed to do in public because people are going to look at it and think you're trying to sell your cow on Shabbat, but you are allowed to do it at home. So how could you explain that? If you say that everything that you're not allowed to do in public, you're not allowed to do in private as well. Because well, you're right, it's a machloket tanaim. It's nahi. In fact, it is a machloket tanaim about whether things that are asur for marat ayin also apply in private. The Tanya, as we learned in another braita, which we're going to have later in the Masechah, shotchan v'chama. Let's say a person is walking on Shabbat and it starts raining, and their clothes get soaking wet. They fall into the water. So you take off your clothes, says the braita, and you spray them out in the sun to dry. Avalo keneged am, but you can't do it in front of other people because other people will see that and they'll think you're doing your laundry on Shabbat, which is prohibited. So if they see you put your clothes on the line, then you're not allowed to do it. But if there's no one else seeing it, you're allowed to do it, which is clearly the opinion that even though in public you can't do it because of marat ayin, you can do it in private. But Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon Osrim, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon say you cannot do it. You can't even lay it out in private because since you can't do it in public, you can't do it in private. And so in fact, there is a machloket Tanaim as to whether things that are usur in public will also be asur in private. And we're going to stop here. And God willing, pick up this topic tomorrow morning at 7:30.
Very much.
Everyone, Shavua Tov.
This thing about mufna, just so if it's extraneous, then it's easier to make a gezerah shava. That's what you said.
Correct. It's more powerful. So you can make a gezerah shava even if it's not extra. Gezerah shava comes from words being similar.
Right.
The thing is that the fact that it says the same words in two places does not necessarily mean that you can learn anything you want from those two things.
Okay.
Meaning you would say, it says something by Shabbos, it says something by Yom Tov, let's say.
Right.
Let's compare them.
Right.
But then that's a true Gezerah Shavah. The problem is that if then I can come and identify, what we say Meshivin means you can then ask about it.
Right.
If I can say, oh no, that's only true by Shabbat because Shabbat has this rule, but not Yom Tov, then that will take away the Gezerah Shavah.
Right.
But if something is mufna, then even though the things are not similar, the fact that there's extra words in this context, extra words in that context, allows us to learn something between them.
I got it. Thank you.
What it doesn't do, and I'll just point this out, is tell you what exactly it is that you learn.
Right.
Right? Meaning, because I could say many things. I could say, it says those words here and the words here, let's learn X or Y or Z. That we still always rely, like all Gzerot Shavah, on whatever tradition, on, whatever you've been taught by your teacher. But you can't, if it's truly extra, you can't then say, oh, you can't compare those two things because of some logical reason.
Right. Okay. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
It's a tough job.
Yes. Yes. Laila.
I like to.
Right.